everybody. Good morning. I just unzipped my coat and realized I have polka dots on like that photo of me, so I should get some new clothes and mix it up. First I just want to say it's wonderful to be here, and I want to thank everyone who invited me. It's an honor. So I've been thinking about the word democracy a lot. As they mentioned in the introduction, I published a book about the internet called The People's Platform, Taking Back Power and Culture in a Digital Age. And the French edition was put out by a Montreal publisher, actually, and they came up with the title democracy.com and kind of, I think, got to the essence of what the book is about. And the People's Platform challenges the commonplace idea that the internet has had a democratizing effect on the world, while asking what a truly democratic internet would look like, and more crucially, how a democratic internet would actually be funded. In the wake of that project, I actually started developing a documentary film, which I'm now in the edit suite. It's being produced by the National Film Board of Canada, and it's about democracy and political theory. I don't think this will be the title, but the phrase that keeps coming to my mind as maybe a tagline is, democracy may not exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone. It's not the catchiest thing. It probably won't sell a lot of tickets, but that's sort of where I'm at these days, thinking about these things. So this talk is shaped by those two projects, my book and my film. And I'm going to be honest, my book actually emerged out of frustration. It emerged out of aggravation with tech conferences. Particularly with conferences about the internet's effect on arts and media. Because so much of what you would hear at these conferences is basically, a kind of grandiose marketing advice, right? Like, here's how you build your brand, and here's how you can use these digital tools and get some followers and get some friends, and there'd be this jargon and these buzzwords. And these conferences just drove me crazy. And that's why I was so happy to hear from the organizers of this convening that that's precisely not what this gathering is about, that this event is not about how to use the web or digital tools effectively for our own personal ends, for our private ends, but rather thinking critically and collaboratively as a community about the meaning, purpose, and politics of digital communications technologies. So in any case, those conferences really drove me crazy enough that I wrote an entire book. And I think dark muses are really important for artists, right? You have to take your inspiration where you can get it, and sometimes it's hatred and irritation. I really think it is important that all of us think systemically and broadly about the internet, because the digital is where we spend a huge amount of our lives. And one thing the internet does, one thing the digital does, is it puts all of us, regardless of our specific professional field or creative discipline, in the same boat. So filmmakers, novelists, musicians, activists, curators, journalists, you name it, right? We're all working and communicating through the same pipes and platforms over broadband networks or on Facebook, Twitter, right? And we invest in these spaces that we don't control, but we're really dependent on them. Once distinct channels of telephony, television, radio, film, and print media have all merged, and this is what people call convergence, right? It's all the same pipes now. And so as a consequence, things like net neutrality, the presence or absence of baseline privacy protections, telecom mergers and acquisitions, these have tremendous effects. These sort of abstract seeming things have tremendous direct effects on all of us, right? And of course, it's not just the arts and media that are affected by this transformation. Every sort of political, social, cultural, educational interaction depends on the same digital networks. And the more you think about this, the more kind of terrifying it is. Right now, there is essentially no such thing as a public internet. Almost everything flows through private pipes. And yet using the internet for the consumption of culture, or the creation of culture, or to search for information is nearly as essential to modern life as having electricity or plumbing in your home, right? Because try to get a job or go to school without it. So there's a paradox here that we haven't fully reckoned with, which is, is access to the internet privilege or a basic necessity for survival? And that's why it's so interesting to be talking to you all about arts in a digital world at a conference organized by the Canada Council, a public institution, because you don't often get to talk about these issues in this kind of space. So I just want to quickly go through and remind us of some of the failed prophecies of the digital age and what came to pass. So the internet was supposed to be free and ubiquitous. In reality, a cable cartel has monopolized the industry to rake in profits. We're seeing renewed attacks on net neutrality under the Trump administration. Here in Canada, there was better news from the CRTC about community broadband. But what happens in the US affects the world. The internet was supposed to make our culture more open, but the companies that dominate the tech world are very opaque. Instead of liberating users to express themselves freely, it has facilitated all-invasive corporate and government surveillance. The web was envisioned as a kind of Robin Hood, stealing audience and influence away from the big and giving it to the small. We were told that gatekeepers would crumble and middlemen would wither while artists thrived without them. But instead what we've seen is the rise of some of the most mammoth centralized mediators of all time, Google or Alphabet, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, et cetera. These are the ultimate middlemen. Where the internet was supposed to equalize access by leveling the playing field and bring prosperity to all, the gap between rich and poor, the most popular and the practically invisible, the have and the have-nots has grown. Instead of decommodifying art and culture, every communication has become an advertising opportunity. So, as I put it, we haven't seen so much of a revolution as a rearrangement. And, I think that only by fully reckoning and acknowledging the deep similarities between the non-digital past, right, and the digital world, can we understand why so many of these utopian predictions didn't come through? We emphasize change when we need to look just as much at continuity. Fake news, which was brought up in the last talk, fake news is a great example. Because on the one hand, we're seeing something unprecedented, in part with this new presidential administration that is happy to sort of amplify baseless lies. And we're seeing an enormous audience hungry for memes and mashups that justify their confirmation biases. But fake news didn't emerge, out of the internet or out of the 2016 election, right? It's the logical conclusion of the news industry's profit-driven, advertiser-driven business model, the roots of which go back decades. The conditions that create the blight of fake news online are also those that have driven respectable print newspapers to lay off reporters and close their forum bureaus, and that allow, publications, tabloids like the National Enquirer to thrive in print at every grocery store. So problems that plagued our old media system have carried over and actually intensified, and will continue to shape it. And so in the book, I identify those trends as consolidation, centralization, and commercialism. So consolidation is obvious, right? There are these massive digital companies that now are the biggest digital companies in the world in terms of their market capitalization. Centralization, I believe Simone may have addressed this, or the group may have addressed this in their manifesto, the tyranny of algorithmic decision-making, the fact that there's this contradiction that even though it seems like we all have these personalized devices in our pocket, right? Everything is geared toward us. We're all dependent on this sort of centralized back end we don't understand, and there's a return of vertical integration in the sense that a company like Amazon is sort of the book in the bookstore and everything, and the bookshelf, and everything in between, right? So the last one, though, is the trend that I like to obsess over, and that's commercialism. Because we all know, right, that these ostensibly free services we use online are, in fact, we pay with our private data, that they're advertising driven. And they're in fact more dependent on ad revenue than their television or newspaper predecessors. And this is really important because it's not just about continuity, it's about intensification. Data brokers amass dossiers of surprising detail and predictive power through highly invasive methods, right? So a company like Disney didn't follow you around the mall or read your diary, but a company like Google does. And we just heard about the Internet of Things, right? Or sort of the fact that the digital is now going into the objects that we have in our houses that we use every day. More and more personal information from us is going to be leaking from these networked devices. Already our phone mics and our smart TVs, right, are sources of information for marketers. And this has very serious anti-democratic consequences. Digital advertising reinforces prejudice and inequity in very alarming ways that I don't think we can't really overstate this. Marketers have more power and face fewer regulations than under the old paradigm. They sort and rank us, discriminate against us. You can see this even in the way that it's been shown by researchers that women, for example, when they do job searches, see ads for low-level, entry-level position. White men get ads for, executive, jobs with a C at the beginning. Low-income people get price gouged or offered predatory interest rates on loans. I do a lot of organizing around economic justice issues and debt, and we see this over and again with our members. We see the way they're targeted by predatory financial services. And there's evidence that these sorts of predatory advertising through lead generators online actually played a key role in the 2008 financial collapse, right? Who got bad loans? So we're all impacted by this. If the economy is brought down through these behavioral marketing techniques, we're all going to suffer. We can't get away from it. And we can extrapolate to art and culture. Who sees what? Who gets to see what ads or is pitched what events online? I've never seen anyone do an academic study on that, but I'd be really interested to know. And so we're seeing the effects of this kind of behavioral targeting more and more. We saw it with the election, with the news around Cambridge Analytica, which I'm sure you guys saw, which is a marketing firm that people say may have tipped the election or the Brexit vote. And though that reporting might be overblown, this is certainly a trend that we're all dealing with. And this is the business model and the methodology underpinning and shaping so many of the channels we depend on as arts professionals. And I think that we really have to engage with that reality. The spaces we spend the vast majority of our time online are more akin to commercial shopping centers than public parks or art museums, right? Sylvania last talk mentioned the word library. We have the opportunity to sort of, have the Library of Alexandria online. Except, again, these are private spaces. They're not libraries designed to sort of, protect our cultural heritage. So today, I think the sort of disjunction between some of the terms we use to describe online space, which can often be these sort of civic-minded metaphors, and the reality of the commercial conditions, right? There's a disjunction there. And so the question is, well, can we take these civic-minded metaphors that we sometimes resort to and make them a reality? So in a digital realm, who stands for the public interest? The answer has to be all of us. The alternative to grappling with these issues and defending public goods in a digital age is leaving the future in the hands of Silicon Valley, which is both a geographic place and a kind of ideology. In 1995, before the first dot-com bubble burst, two academics coined the phrase California ideology to capture this. They said California ideology was a mix of cybernetics, free market economics, and counterculture libertarianism, right? So this is the ideology embedded in most of the online platforms we use and services, regardless of where we live. Because, a company like Alphabet or Google, right, dominates search not just in California, but for the whole world. And so every time we go online, profits flow back to one region and empower a specific class of people. So money and wealth concentrate in one direction while an ideology flows in the opposite. So my thought experiment is, what would the internet look like if it was suffused with a Canada ideology and not a California ideology? And I know it's sort of against the Canadian ethos to even ask that question, which is why I like it, because it's a bit incongruous, right? Would English be the default language? Would there be more interest in programming algorithms and developing recommendation engines that promote and lift up local creativity and culture? Would there be the same obsession with scale and acceleration and growth? And this is something I've thought a lot about, which is the power of small numbers, because there's this incredible temptation with metrics to always go bigger and larger and to reach that mass. Would there be more women programmers? And here I'm thinking about the National Film Board's recent commitment to a 50% gender diversity for its productions and its budgets, and hopefully a commitment to racial diversity will follow. If there were more women programmers, how might our online lives be transformed? Because there's research that shows that young girls are more sensitive to private protection and location targeting and these kinds of things. Would an internet shaped by a Canada ideology have a different conception of democracy at its core? I ask that question because the internet, we all know, promotes a very distinct conception of democracy. Democracy is equated with the free market, with competition, and with the emergence of winners and losers, right? There are these winner-take-all network effects that promote that view. And, we default to that view. The view of the web is meritocratic and thus democratic because we can all throw our hats into the ring. And there's something very seductive about this view, and I'll admit it, right? Because for creative types, for artists, we like to think of ourselves as, as individuals, as self-made, operating within a meritocracy, and some of us are successful and some of us aren't, right? And that's why, as I said in the title's talk, there's a kind of contradiction in terms when you talk about a democratic culture, because art and culture is one realm where some of us are okay with inequality. Like not all art is equally good, not all music is equally good. We have a sort of tolerance for inequality. and cultural critics have been railing against one possible definition of democratic culture. Democratic is synonymous with the most popular, the biggest box office success, the most viral, since Theodore Adorno and the Frankfurt School, right? So I've always been sympathetic to that kind of snobby view. But I don't think we can stop the conversation there. I think we need to offer an alternative definition and democratic vision as it relates to the creative, expressive realm. And this is why I think the phrase democratic culture is useful, not despite of, but because of its contradictions and ambiguities, it forces us to think. What do those words mean together and separately? So, democracy, democratic. We all know it comes from the Greek, right? Demos and kratos, people in power, the people of the power. But often we think of it in this watered down way of majority rule, right? Occasional voting. That's how we've come to equate democracy with popularity or with virality in these days. But the classicist Josiah Ober has looked more closely at the origins, the original Greek meaning of democracy in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. And the kratos, that power part of the word, actually meant the capacity to do things, right? Democracy then, what he's discovered is actually what democracy really meant in its first, when it first emerged, was not voting or people even ruling, but people collaborating. Democracy is a system that enhances our capacity to do things together. And the word culture, democratic culture, culture and cultivate share the same root. Culture is a cognitive culture, meaning it means the blade of a plowshare. So this etymology always envisions me to imagine a cultural ecology, a field from which all of our creative contributions emerge, right? We know that individual creators don't just emerge from the ether, that we're all supported by organizations, that we're supported by other individuals, that now we depend on the infrastructure of the internet. So we're embedded beings who create work in social context, toiling shared soil in hopes that our labors bear fruit. And it's up to all of us whether this soil is enriched or depleted, whether it nurtures diverse and vital produce or allows predictable crops to take root and run rampant. And that's why I always think of advertising money, the $700 billion a year that humans spend on advertising globally, as a kind of artificial fertilizer that encourages the production of culture that people might, would likely otherwise not care about and not create. So fundamentally, as I'm sure you've picked up on, I believe the problems we're facing are economic, not technological. The reason there's been so much continuity as opposed to change with this supposed digital revolution is because the underlying media business models haven't been disrupted at all. In fact, they've been put on steroids in many instances. And in response, it's very urgent that we really think about public alternatives. Public agencies, in turn, have to consider the whole cultural ecology, not just individual creators and independent institutions, but the communications infrastructure we now depend on. We have to find ways to adapt and extend tried and true policies while taking the unique architecture of 21st century communications technologies into account, an architecture that tends towards abundance and not scarcity. At the same time, we need to invent new policies, embrace new ideas, and imagine new futures. Our communication system is at a crossroads. I really believe that. One way leading towards an increasingly corporatized and commercialized and personalized in a kind of scary way world where we are treated and targeted as consumers rather than a real cultural commons where we're nurtured as creators and citizens. And so we need to take those identities as citizens and creators, and we need to ask why we accept that this commercial-driven, advertiser-driven model is what the internet is, what our online experiences are. Why aren't there more public or cooperative alternatives and models out there? And there actually are. We don't hear about them a lot. And I think it's part of the onus is on us to research and find things and discover them. Why isn't Netflix publicly owned, or Uber cooperatively run, or Airbnb run in tandem with municipalities, or Twitter a nonprofit? And in fact, there's a sort of growing movement right now pushing for users to actually buy Twitter, which actually isn't doing that well. We need to ask ourselves what we can do to nurture, grow, and protect the integrity of our communities and creations on a fully commercialized web. What small-scale experiments and behavioral shifts are possible? And again, we have to remember it doesn't always take mass numbers. The few can be very powerful. What investments and transformations could we make if we work together? What larger, more systemic policy changes might be achievable down the road if we set our sights on them now, if we were proactive instead of reactive and always trying to protect the old way of doing things? And that's why I'm thrilled the Canada Council has convened this gathering, because I think that we really need to get together and imagine what a digital revolution with cheering would actually look like and how we could work together to have it become something real. So thank you.